So we call this, sort of worldview or meta-narrative. There's a battle going on for the worldview, and it's related to AI, but it's certainly not exclusive to AI. And on the left-hand side, there's this view that a person is just this emergent property that arises from natural causes. And isn't it cool? Isn't it cool that we've all, evolved by time and chance? And on the other hand, I think all of the people in this room would say, well, no, humans are creatures, created beings that are made in the image of God. We're not time and chance emergent properties. But those views, and on the left-hand side, if you look at the society in general, probably on the order of half, maybe more, would lean toward the left there. If you look in a university, probably 2/3, at least a third, are very far on the left, a third are in the middle, and about a third are off on the right. So these affect how we think about AI as well. And one of the things that we see is we're trying to differentiate humans from AI, and it's pretty easy right now. It'll get harder depending on how we judge that. But we've had this, ongoing, how do we differ from animals? At first we thought it was use tools. No, we found they use tools. And so we keep crossing these things off the list. And science may continue to cross things off the list, but at the end of the day, whatever we learn from science, which is great, because science is searching whether the scientist himself or herself believes in God, science is uncovering how God made the universe and how it operates. So no matter what we discover over here, it doesn't change the fact that we are creatures made in God's image. And not just because we believe only, these Old Testament verses, but because we follow somebody that's reasonable for us to follow. And it's not Ray Kurzweil. So Ray Kurzweil, you just brought him up. He believes that we're heading to this point where AI is going to augment humans, and eventually I'll be able to not just be augmented by AI, but I'll be able to upload my consciousness into a machine. If I were to do that, I would want to understand who's going to run the machine and if we're going to turn it off or not. But that's his future, and to me, that's like a wild science fiction dream. But our dream is based on this guy who said some things, and then he proved who he was by raising himself from the dead. So I think we have a stronger foundation for what we believe than what's happening out there. And I guess, all of us are challenged with how we help people over here on that side come closer onto this side. And that's going to differ with every culture and community that you're in. But these are competing, and AI has added lots of fuel to the left-hand side there, and so it's becoming more upfront. Also, this paper, a friend of mine pointed this paper out. It's a fantastic paper. It's really important work. And it's about I mentioned before, using AI agents that talk to each other and have different roles and functions. And they kind of, in my view, they sort of slipped in their thinking, which is easy to do, in that they're using consciousness and cognition here. But the paper authors, first of all, there's nobody from the cognitive sciences, psychology, neuroscience, no philosopher. It's a collection of authors that are computer scientists, folks that work on robots. And, I'm moving out of my corral here. Working on robots, and then people that understand the healthcare system in America. Okay, well, that's like an administrative thing. But nobody that understands the brain. And yet these people, who again are doing really fantastic work, have accidentally used terms that they've defined differently than these other sciences would. And so they're kind of in the place that Richard Feynman warned about. Science is a way of trying not to fool yourself. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself. And you're the easiest person to fool. So if I start using consciousness and I dumb it down to the degree of awareness, my Nest thermostat's aware of the temperature and movement and light, that doesn't mean it's conscious. It just means it has sensors on it. So this is, again, great work, but by using that word, they're just kind of moving into this territory where it's kind of, you're fooling yourself to think that's cognition. And I see a lot of this happening in AI, where people are using words from outside of their field in ways that people in that field would not agree. Like, I know neuroscientists, I should ask some of them, who, if I showed them this, they would go, that's not consciousness. They would like scoff at it. So it's dangerous, even though those people had good intentions. So someone else, you also brought up Yuval Harari. He said that language is the operating system. You know what an operating system is like on this computer? Operating system is what I'm interacting with to run applications and do backups and connect to the web and all that stuff. All my applications run on top of another application called the operating system. And that's how this functions. And Harari is he's really hit on something true, which is that language it's how we operate. Why? Because language is how God operates too. Like, it doesn't say God took out a spade and dug, the oceans. It said he spoke. So God's word, like in the beginning was the word. So language is powerful. It's the way that we're made. And what Harari is saying, and by the way, so when he talks about myth, he also talks about shared fictions. He also has a good point here in that money, for example, is something that's not physical. Like a dollar bill or a single euro bill as a material object is not worth any more than a 20 or 100 euro bill, except that we all believe it's worth more because we've decided that we're going to share that belief system. And what Harari says is that there was this, at some point, cognitive revolution that happened. And if you're, in his world of evolution, and he would say time and chance evolution, not theistic evolution, that the brain got large enough that Homo sapiens could start to have these shared fictions, is what they call them. But he's right there, and this is, if you think about it, at no time in the history of mankind, well, I'll say it and then I'll give you a couple caveats, have humans ever interacted with language with another being that wasn't either God or another human being or Balaam's donkey? Maybe a few other examples like that, right? So when we interact with something with language, we are wired to ascribe to that language user a personhood sort of thing, an intentionality. And that's not happening with a token predictor. So he's right in that. But where we differ is that God's the inventor of the word, and this is our operating system because we're created in the image of God, not because we evolved somehow by time and chance into that. There's also this kind of worldview called, how many people have heard the term long-termism? So long-termism is this, there's these groups like the Future of Life Institute at Oxford, where they think about existential risk for the human race. And so they have this thing, so we talk about, in my Father's house there are many rooms. Ray Kurzweil talks about the singularity. These guys talk about the safe place, where we're all smarter and enlightened because we have technology and more knowledge, and that we, humanity on this little spaceship, have to navigate around from technology and coordination around these dangerous regions of, this is a virtual sort of thing, not a physical dangerous region, of things that might wipe out the human race. And we do agree with these folks that it's important that we not wipe out the human race, but taken to extreme as they do, they put value on the human race as a whole and the survival of the species, as they would put it, but not any value in any one particular human being that's part of that race. And so it's the good of the many outweighs the good of the few, or the one, right? So the Star Trek, thing. So you get quotes like this: saving lives in poor countries may have significantly smaller ripple effects if our goal is to save the race than saving and improving lives in rich countries. Translated, yes, we want to create new technologies with AI to make us smarter and better, but it doesn't have to be for everyone, just us. So that's a sort of a difference that we have as well. I really like John Wyatt, who's, I don't know if he's here, but he's part of the Science Network. He talks about this as well. He talks about, the people that suffer from diseases. And rather than trying to make a billionaire live longer, maybe we could put the same sort of energy into common health problems that people have around the world, right? It's really interesting to see how billionaires spend their money. Like people like Bill Gates, whatever you think of him, he's spending his money in ways that he's trying to drive down poverty. He's trying to drive down disease. You might not agree with him on other things, but that's a good use of money. Better use than building rockets so you can go up into space like Jeff Bezos is doing. And so he's saying, look, instead of doing that, why don't we use our resources to use and these technologies to kind of lift other boats? This seems like, I know John is a Christian, so not surprising, but this seems like a good worldview or sort of position for Christians to take. Someone also asked about copyright. So there was, maybe it was a year ago, there was a person that used AI to create this graphic novel and then was turned down by the U.S. Copyright Office because they said copyright is for things made by humans. And they made this argument that they were prompting the model and they were doing the work, but they kind of lost that argument. I think it was updated more recently to say in some aspects of this could be copyrighted, but not in the same way as if you had written the book from scratch without AI. So that's been a challenge to new challenge in the space of law. Another new challenge is this lower left there. My content was used to train this AI. So you probably have heard the story of Getty Images and other groups. But Getty Images, I think they're suing OpenAI because you can do an OpenAI search and even some of the images that it produces have the Getty watermark on them. So that's a pretty clear sign that they were using their data as part of the training. So that's going to be a continuing issue. It's also another reason why openness, transparency, and provenance are important. And we have solved this in some domains, like I don't know about in Europe, but in the US, probably in Europe as well. In the US, oftentimes they'll put the lyrics to a song up there, and then there's the CLI or CCLI number at the bottom. There's a nickel that goes to, whatever the, Hillsong or whoever. That's a way to manage content. So when we sing a song in our church that you wrote, well, you get some royalty from that. Same thing happens if my song is played on the radio, then, a nickel comes my way. So we've solved this, but not for AI, and we won't solve it if we don't have transparency in the training. And then, it sort of comes around to, I've used OpenAI to create my comic book, but it's using, Getty Images as part of it. So do I also owe money to Getty Images? And then more recently, it's kind of like not exactly this, but there was a movie that there was a automated assistant whose voice was played by this actress, Scarlett Johansson. And OpenAI approached her and said, can we use your voice for ChatGPT? And she said no. And so they created a voice that kind of sounds like her, and so now she's suing them. So these are kind of crazy new situations that come up with AI. All right, so a couple other things like changing from technology. Here's a chart from a March of 2023 report. You can see the group that did it at Goldman Sachs down at the bottom, of how AI would affect jobs in different sectors. So light blue is a job where that's the portion of the job that could be taken over by AI, and dark blue is the portion of the job that wouldn't. So, if you're building ground, if you're like the dude that mows the lawn here, you're golden with respect to AI. Although I will say, I've seen some pretty smart automatic lawnmowers, so, but according to these guys anyway, install maintenance, construction, production factories. Guys like me, bottom right, I'm like totally out of luck. Mathematicians and computer, we're all going to be taken over. So I have to just take the advice I gave my son, be the guy that, knows how you're going to replace yourself. Looking at this, it can look kind of scary. They also said, though, that if you look at the employment mix today, 60% of the jobs didn't exist before 1940. And if you look at growth and you take that into account, 85% of the growth in the last 80 years is technology movement that creates new positions. So I mentioned earlier the job of prompt engineer. You can like search for job. It's a legit job with job description and all that stuff. So I wouldn't look at this with fear and trembling, but more as a sort of a guide to say, yes, some of these jobs are going to go away, but I have a heads up now because I'm a computer scientist. I have a heads up now that in 10 years' time, all of my work could be replaced by a person. So I need to find the value add and look for the jobs that are going to be created and start to move in that direction. The point is that this is not a new thing. This has been happening ever since technology was introduced. Yeah.
Maybe I missed something, but the light gray, what does that mean?
I will have to look that up. I don't remember. I was thinking that too as I looked at it. I don't remember what the gray color was. Good question. It's one of these two if you want to go to you can actually look at, remember that QR code that I showed? So this is number 48 and 49. So you could actually pull that report up and look for it. But I'll look for it. Okay, let's kind of wind up here. There's some things that are happening that are encouraging with respect to law. The EU finally did adopt this AI Act that they've been talking about for quite some time. It talks about 4 different levels of risk and what you're responsible for doing as a company. So an example here in the high risk, if you're implementing an AI algorithm like that controls how you're hiring, or if you're, let's say you're a rideshare company and you have algorithms that control how much this person gets to business going to this way or this business or what have you. Then you've got to notify employees before you implement, and put some guidelines in place. So there's some specific things. And there's some significant penalties for violation. And I had never seen penalties structured this way. Maybe it's common in Europe, but in the US, I'm typically seeing like you go to court and the company, some jury decides that they get a $100 million fine. But this algorithm seems like very, very eye-opening if you're one of these companies, because if you're a company with up to 35 million in revenues, not profit, but revenues, you got to give 7% of your revenues. That is a huge, not 7% of your profit. That's like a huge, so if your profit is 7%, you go to 0 profit. And then smaller companies up to 3% of revenues or 15 million is greater. So these are significant policies and penalties. And then I've already mentioned this before. There is another, it's called the EU Platform Workers Directive, this gig economy of people that are like Uber drivers and things. So there's also work that hasn't yet been implemented in the EU to try to regulate this area and the use of AI there. And you can see some of it in the high level of risk there. The US president released an executive order last October. That's, 200 pages long, and not only goes through and gives certain sets of action that need to happen, but goes as far as saying in 180 days, the Secretary of Energy will do this and do that. And so very specific. It also has some things that illustrate the challenges of regulating AI. So one of the requirements in the US president's executive order is that if you are building a machine that's of a certain amount of power, computing power, you have to report that to the government. If you're doing an AI model that requires a certain amount of computation above a certain level, like something on par with OpenAI and ChatGPT, you have to report that to the government. Well, that's a fine idea, but as models get smarter and smaller, it's not something that you'd ever bump up against. So a lot more needs to happen, but this is at least a start. Then finally, the Bletchley Park statement. There was an AI summit at Bletchley Park in the UK. I think it was like in March, it was recent, where they went through and tried to develop an international agenda that balances regulation and governance and other things. And then just last week, following up on this was a summit in Seoul, Korea, where 16 companies, including US companies at the bottom, but companies from even UAE and China, ROK, Republic of Korea, is South Korea, not North Korea, that they agreed to a set of guidelines. And you can criticize this as saying it's unenforceable or just window dressing, but it's at least a start, and it's encouraging to see that keep going. Then I thought this was an interesting study, number 52 on the list of references. This other report, Investing in AI for Social Good, Analysis of European National Strategies. So they took, the group that did this report took the AI plans from many different countries, not all, but many countries in Europe, and they categorized the investments they were making according to these different categories, and then they compiled this comparison, which at least, with this comparison would say some countries are much more focused on the societal impact of AI than others. Netherlands and Denmark are way out in front in terms of having investments and plans in these different areas. So this is something you would like to see other countries like Sweden, Spain, Germany, France, Finland, Lithuania come more on par with these other two. It's a reflection of how the government is thinking about AI, and it's a good thing that to see that. I want to close with this one more sort of food for thought. This is a evangelical statement of principles on AI that was released by the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist, whatever they call it, group in the U.S. Sorry? Convention. And I think it was 2019, and I found it really excellent and forward-thinking, because they were anticipating some of the very things that many of us weren't even thinking about 5 years ago. And it's broken into 12 parts. It's not a long report. Each of these sections has what they think is God's perspective and how we should think about these with Christian values. And I just found it really, really an excellent resource that I would say is worth again, it's number 33 on the reference list. It's really worth looking at, whether you're a Southern Baptist or not. And it's just kind of like thinking about how should we think about AI in terms of medicine or in terms of public policy or data or the workplace. So